we were just so blinded by our own zeal for doing something, like taking action, that the common sense was just thrown out the window.
Greetings and welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Branstetter, founder and podcast producer at MaxPodcasting. And you can email me at max@maxpodcasting.com to save time with your high-quality podcast. This is episode 161, and today's guest is none other than Jared Easley. Easily the most Jared guest of all time. No, Jared is the co-founder of Podcast Movement, the world's largest community of podcasters. Also, they also host and put on the largest conference for podcasters and all sorts of awesome people in the podcasting industry. If you've listened to any other episodes of the Wild Business Growth Podcast, you probably will recognize Podcast Movement because I pretty much mention it every episode, or at least at the start of every segment. It's a super cool, one of the coolest organizations in the world. And Jared, in addition to leading the charge in terms of community and content in a Podcast Movement, he also hosts Starve the Doubts, an awesome podcast you'll be sure to learn from and laugh from, mostly laugh at Jared's dad jokes from. And in this interview, we talked everything from how Jared got into podcasts in the first place, whether he even knew if he would launch a podcast conference, the story behind Podcast Movement, how they've been able to grow, and everything from wrestling to banjos to dad jokes. Just, gotta reemphasize that there. It is easily Jared. Well, it's easily Jared. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Jared Easley, the man, J-Rod. I'm sure you go by J-Rod. I don't know where that came from. The man himself. Jared, co-founder of Podcast Movement, one of my favorite communities in the world, if not my favorite community. Jared, long time coming. Really, really honored to have you on. How you doing today?
I'm good, Max. I've been called everything. I've been called Gerald, Jerry. I mean, you know how your name gets misspelled on the Starbucks cup. I mean, it's just like a common theme with me. So I always tell people my name's Jared, like the jewelry store in the US. People will resonate with that most likely. And then I used to say Jared, like the Subway guy, but then I had to stop telling that joke for anybody that knows about that. So
yeah, he's a fellow Hoosier alum like myself, and he was one of them that we are most prouded and most unique to talk to you about it. Hey, you know what, Jared from Sub, but we can table that conversation.
Yeah,
a long ways back now.
Well, there was a time when you would be proud of him, but yeah, that's not now.
how times have changed. So anyway, obviously we're going to get into the Podcast Movement story today. But before we do that, I have a very important question you probably never saw coming.
Oh, never. Nope.
What is the best concert you've ever been to?
Well, Max, before I answer that question, I attended a kind of a networking icebreaker type thing at a cheesy business get together. And that was the opening question. And I remember thinking, okay, that's actually a really good question because that gets people reminiscing about a feel good moment or something. So I started asking that on the podcast that I do, my personal podcast. And so, yes, I love that question. And so I have been blessed to be at a variety of concerts and attend a number of them. And everybody from Willie Nelson to Pearl Jam to, I don't know, I can name others, but actually a favorite concert of mine is somebody that's not as well known. It's a singer-songwriter with a acoustic guitar, and his name is David Wilcox. He is based out of Asheville, North Carolina, but the guy is just a folksy kind of guy, and he is one of the most interesting songwriters that I've ever come across, and I just love his music. I love his thoughts on things and his perspective. So he's one of my favorites. I've seen him multiple times. Whenever he comes anywhere within a driving distance of me, I go. During the pandemic, he was doing a lot of live streaming and playing, and I tuned into all of them and just had the time of my life. So yeah, David Wilcox, for someone that's looking for something new, something different. His music is really amazing. I think people can appreciate it just from the songwriting and the talent that he has on the acoustic guitar. He does all these really unique alternate tunings and stuff, and he'll actually, in the middle of a concert, he'll be tuning his guitar and telling a story. And so that's my answer. David Wilcox, not one that probably people would expect.
Yeah, he needs to pay you as a brand ambassador, because that was a phenomenal testimonial. But you committed a terrible mistake of mentioning Asheville, because Asheville is one of my new favorite cities in the world. And I had experienced it once growing up, but not until this year had I experienced it as age 21 plus, and it's a different city.
Yeah.
But the parks and the outdoor stuff is so cool there. And I know you went on a trip there before Podcast Movement this year. You did some of those waterfalls.
Oh yeah.
How was your experience on Sliding Rock? Which for anybody who's not familiar is like what it sounds like, a giant natural slide, like a natural giant waterfall you can slide down.
That's exactly what it is. And I had not been on it. I had heard of it forever. And I used to live near Asheville. I used to live in a little town called Weaverville back in the late 90s. And not many people know that about me, but I was working as an intern at a camp there for a year and had the time of my life. But I had never gone to Sliding Rock. And so this summer, when my daughter, who's now in 5th grade, went to her summer camp, she goes to a summer camp called Ridgehaven. We decided, being my sister's family and my family, or my wife and I, we decided, hey, let's go to Sliding Rock. And so we did this, and I wasn't real sure what I was getting into, but when I got there, it was so amazing. You basically and safely take this little, almost like a stairwell up to this area, and then you have like a lifeguard type person that kind of guides you. You sit on your butt, kind of push yourself out into a stream that's going down these rocks, and you literally slide. I don't know how far it is, it's pretty far, into this pool of water, and it's ice cold. And then you get out and do it again, and you do it as many times you want. It's a little bit crazy, but it is a blast. And so yeah, if you ever go anywhere near Asheville in the summertime.
Oh, you did it. Oh man, you made the mistake of someone who's never been there before, but here we are.
Yeah. If you ever go to Asheville, North Carolina during the summer, you have to go to Sliding Rock. You have to. It is just an amazing thing.
I second that. My fiance and I, we did not go on it, but next time we definitely have to. It looked like so much fun. And then people come prepared. We didn't even have swimsuits on, but we had clothes on, just not swimsuits. But there were people that took floats. There was even a family that brought a blow up air mattress and went down on it.
That sounds fun.
It's a really special place.
I would say bring water shoes, Max. That's my one thing. I didn't have water shoes, and so you're stepping on rocks, and some of them can be a little slippery and stuff. So I would definitely say, if you have water shoes, go ahead and wear those.
Bit of a slippery situation.
Yes, well said.
So we've already hit on my two main points of David Wilcox and Sliding Rock. So I don't know if there's much left to cover, but I figure might as well talk podcasts a little bit.
We can.
Thank you. I appreciate it. The permission. Can you describe the moment that you listened to a podcast episode for the first time?
Yeah. So the first podcast that I recall listening to was by the producers of the TV show Lost. And so it was a gentleman named Damon Lindelof, I think is his last name. And then
he's I'm sure we'll get an angry email from
Carlton
him.
Cuse. These two guys were the producers for Lost. And I really got hooked on Lost at the time when that show was first coming out. So I would listen. I found out that they had a podcast. And so I was like still learning what that was. So I think I downloaded it on iTunes on my desktop, and then I transferred it to my new whatever device I had at the time. I don't even remember.
Walkie-talkie.
Yeah, something like that. Some iPod or whatever. And then I listened to it, and I just fell in love with it because these guys were very creative and funny, and kind of giving you some different perspectives about the show that you might not have considered while just watching it. And so I immediately was like, oh, this is great. And they've had inside jokes, Max, that were so cheesy. And like, I'm a cheesy dad joke kind of guy.
Hey, this is why we get along.
It totally resonated with me. So they like one that won't, like, when I tell it, it won't do it justice. But like one thing was, they'd be like, oh, Carlton's gonna bust out the banjo, and he's like, don't make me bust out the banjo or whatever. And then all of a sudden you'd hear like this, and of course it was like post edit or during the show, they added in like this cheesy banjo music, and it was like pretending like he's playing this banjo, but of course he's not playing it. It's a joke. But I always thought things like that were so cheesy, but they were hilarious, and it had really had nothing to do with Lost. It was just their sense of humor and just them being themselves. And so you'd hear this little banjo clip, and it would always, for people that listen to it, they'd always laugh at that. I always thought that was silly, but I loved that idea. I thought, oh man, this is so great. I listened to like all those episodes, and then I tried listening to a couple other podcasts, but podcasts weren't quite what they are now. So there was one or two that I kind of checked out, but then I kind of lost the zeal and the interest there for probably a few years, which I'm embarrassed to admit. And then it was several years later that I kind of got reintroduced to podcasting, and that story is interesting because a good friend of mine named Chris Murphy, who lives in Nashville, he
Wait, Nashville or Asheville?
Not Asheville, Nashville, Tennessee. He,
Smashville.
yeah, Chris and I used to be in a band together back in the day, believe it or not. And Chris was saying, man, there's these guys, you got to check this out. These guys have a podcast, and they're two guys out in like Salt Lake City, and all they do is talk about how you can create an internet business and quit your job. And I'm like, dude, sign me up. I need to hear this. Because I think we were like daydreamer, like day job guys, that were like, hey, wouldn't it be neat to, do your own thing? And so I started listening to a podcast at that time called Internet Business Mastery, which unfortunately, I don't think it's around anymore. And there was two guys on there named Sterling and Jay, and that wasn't even their real names, pen names or whatever. And so I started listening to them, and that was, I want to say like 2010, 2011. So it was a good, probably 5-year gap where I wasn't really listening to podcasts, but then that one really got me back into it. So I've been pretty hardcore since then.
I'm just picturing that 5-year gap was probably a lot of you listening to the banjo, like on repeat.
Yeah, exactly. I was still listening to stuff. I just wasn't listening to podcasts, and shame on me because there's I'm sure a number of good podcasts that were around at that time, and I just didn't give them a chance. And maybe that's today's lesson, Max, is don't give up so quick.
Yeah, you're really slack. There's really not much you've done for the podcast industry. You haven't really given back at all. It's really, yeah, shame on you. But your example, your example from the Lost podcast actually translates really well to your podcast, Starve the Doubts, which you've been doing since 2013. So congrats. Like, everybody talks about the podcast that, one out of every one podcast doesn't make it past episode 7. Like, you've clearly well exceeded that mark and been able to do it on a consistent basis with fun, engaging, and inspiring content for so long. One thing that sticks out to me about Starve the Doubts is you and your co-hosts and your guests just have so much fun. Like, it's such a positive vibe. And of course there's insights that you can pull back to your business. There's inspiration that comes from it. But you break the ice maybe better than anybody. And for anybody who listens to Starve the Doubts, you'll recognize, I was very intentional with the first question I asked you today. Where did this idea that, hey, I could actually start a podcast myself and have some fun with it, where did that come from for you?
Back in the early like 2010, 2011, that's when blogging was like this massive thing and everybody was doing it or encouraged to do it. And I didn't have confidence in my writing at the time. I just I didn't feel like that would be for me, but I wanted to do something content related. And I've always had an interest in creating content. And so, yeah, podcasting, that's when I started getting interested in that because I had been listening to shows like I was telling you, and I got introduced to shows like Pat Flynn and some others. And that made me kind of like, hey, I really think a podcast would be for me. And then it took me another year before I started because I thought, well, it's expensive. I think you have to buy all this equipment. I didn't really understand that, okay, no, there is like economical options. And I listened to this one guru. I won't name him out of respect, but in hindsight, they gave, in my opinion, really bad advice. And like,
I see why you're not naming them.
I'm not going to name them, just in case people knew who that was or whatever. But I remember
you can mention my name at any time, Jared.
Well, I'm not going to do that, well, I will do that, but I won't do it in this context. So, but I remember I'd listened to someone who was a podcasting influential person, or supposedly, and they were saying, here, buy my, couple $1,000 setup. And I remember thinking, well, if it costs that much to start a podcast, then maybe podcasting isn't for me, because at the time I was just newborn, and kind of still newly married and working the day job. I just didn't have that discretionary extra money to go out and spend on something just to do it. So that for me was a little bit of head trash that I had. I was like, okay, I'm just taking this guy, I'm just listening to this one person rather than going out and doing my own research. And eventually I hear someone tell me about the ATR 2100, which now is the ATR 2100X, but this Audio Technica mic. Yeah.
Which is what I'm speaking into right now, by the way.
That's a wonderful mic, and it's reasonably priced, and it sounds great. And when I found out about that mic, I was like, okay, I really have no excuse now. I can go buy this mic. I can, I don't even have to have a mixer. I can just plug it in to a desktop or a laptop. And that was really what was like, okay, now I can do this. And so then the next hurdle, Max, I know you're like, oh, what are all these hurdles? Which kind of leads into the name of the show, started out. Is the next hurdle was I'm not sure what to talk about. Like, what do I talk about? What would people actually want to hear me say? So that was a little bit of a hang up. And then I realized, okay, I don't have to quote unquote be an expert in anything. I just need to be, I can talk to other people, and I can highlight them, and I can learn from them. And then just sharing that is, valuable, or can be. And so that was the freeing moment, was like, okay, now I know what to do. I can do interviews. And so until I had that moment of that clarity, I was still thinking, okay, maybe I'm not fit for podcasting. But I realized, yes, I can afford this mic. I can talk to other people and tell their stories, and not make it not necessarily about me. And I can still bring value to someone. And so that was, that finally gave me the courage to start hitting record. And then I recorded, oh my gosh, I recorded maybe 30 or 40 episodes before I ever had the guts to publish one. And that was basically a couple of friends just really like heckling me, like, dude, you've done all these interviews, like, go ahead, put them out. so finally I didn't really understand editing, but I watched a few videos and figured it out. And I probably edited my first several podcasts, and I realized, okay, I don't ever want to do that again. So I found a college kid in Texas who was in a band. And I asked him, I got connected with him through a mutual friend. I was like, hey man, can I just give you some extra cash, and I'll just give you a recipe for the podcast, and I'll send you all the files through Dropbox, and you just put together my podcast. And he's like, oh yeah, I'll do it. And so I just threw him some extra cash, and whenever I had an episode, I'd send it to him and tell him, hey, kind of make it set up this way, ABC. And so then that was my introduction to a guy named Clark, and Clark and I are still friends. And he is an entrepreneur. Like, he's got amazing things that's going on. Like, he's got this great startup right now, and I'm actually a small investor in that, and I'm really proud of him. But that connection started with him being in college and him helping me edit my podcast back in 2013. So
everything ties back to music and hurdles.
It does. It really does. Yeah.
I'm envisioning, I can't do this because it will turn out terrible, but somebody should paint a mural of you hurdling while playing the banjo. That would be gold.
I did have a banjo in high school. I learned a couple of basics. I think I could do the Dueling Banjos tune.
Yeah.
Reasonably well, but that was it. I couldn't play anything else. If somebody asked for a request, I would have had to decline, and that would have been a sad moment.
Let's go to a new chord here and get to podcast movement. Let's go to podcast movement, which is always one of the most exciting things to say.
Nice transition.
Thank you. I practice those, not banjo specifically, but yeah. Podcast movement, again, like, I cannot say enough kind things about the community that you and team have created, the live events, the online events, the Facebook group. Like it's really just top of the line, one of the best in the world I've ever seen, and such a inspiring, positive space to be in. So, we could keep going on me kind of feeding you compliments, but in addition to that, we should probably talk about your story as well. You started as a listener, and there was kind of a several-year journey where you were solely a listener. Then you got into Starve the Doubts, and obviously have made your name as a podcaster in itself. What was the pivotable like that? That was threw that in
I like
there
that.
accidentally.
That could be a new podcast name, Pivotable.
Yeah. What was the
Max.
pivotable with Max spelled wrong and everything? But what was the pivotal moment that you really saw the vision of there needs to be an event to gather a bunch of podcasters and people can learn from each other, and this could be a real thing that kind of create some traction?
So I was attending a conference in Las Vegas with a couple of friends that at the time, unfortunately, doesn't exist anymore. It was a good event while it was there.
These are all your examples just don't exist anymore. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. It's like, what happened?
you took all the juice out of them and moved on.
Well, the guy that ran this event, I think he's still running events, but for whatever reason, I think there was some things that didn't work out for this particular event, which is a shame. But New Media Expo was the name of it. NMX was, and before that, I think it was called Blog World. But New Media Expo was every year. It was in Las Vegas, and it was like around January, and like just right before or after CES. So it was like kind of a piggyback strategy where people who are going to CES might come to this conference that's focused on
stay in Vegas for 2 days longer.
Yeah, that I think that's what they were going for, and it probably worked because they had a pretty good attendance. And they focused on social media and YouTube and blogging, and they had like this little red-headed stepchild corner section of the conference that was for podcasting. Like this, that old thing, that cute little thing. Let's just put it over here in the corner here. That's basically what it was. I remember me and a couple of friends and people I'd met through the podcast community, we would go to this event, and I had a lot of fun at that event. I'd never really gone to conferences and trade shows that I actually enjoyed. I mean, I'd gone to some for work or whatever, and they were lame. And this one wasn't lame. Like, people were there and they were passionate and they were like, enjoyed what they did. And a number of the people that I met at this conference were interested in or already doing podcasts. And so to me, it was interesting. Like probably half the people I met or more were interested in or doing podcasting. And so that led to a discussion of, well, if all these people are at this conference for podcasting, why isn't there more content for podcasting? Because it, like I said, it was just like this little tiny forgotten corner of, the conference. But probably half the attendees were interested in it. So that was the aha, that was the light bulb moment, as I was talking to my now business partner, Dan Franks. And he and I were sitting there and saying, why all these people say that they want a podcast conference and there's not one? Why isn't there one? At the time, there wasn't. There's several now, but there wasn't any then. And if there was, we didn't know about them. So we were like, we've listened to enough Pat Flynn and these business podcasts or whatever to realize, okay, how to discern what the market's telling you. And we determined, okay, the market wants a podcast conference. And then the next thought after that was, okay, well, how do you validate something like that? Because you don't want to just spend a lot of resources and create something that people don't want, and then you waste all this time and money. So we determined that, because Dan and I, neither of us had a background in events. Dan's background at the time was he was a CPA and I was a project manager for a software company. So it was like, let's figure this out.
Wait. On that note, though, I did hear that Dan has a secret background as a wrestler as well.
Yes, he does. Not everyone knows that about it. If you do a Google search for Danny Matthews wrestler, you'll see Dan Franks in all his glory. And those pictures are so epic. I share those with everyone that doesn't know him. Yeah.
That was my entire interview prep for this, was just Googling those 3 words.
Rightfully so, Max. Yeah. When he hears this, he's going to be like, I'm never talking to Jared again. But that's one of my favorite things to do to embarrass him is when people meet him for the first time and then he walks away. I'll be like, did you know about him? And then I show the pictures and they're all like, oh my gosh. it's just really awesome, funny moment. It's a rib.
Likewise, he needs to pay you to not be a brand ambassador.
No, I mean Dan, I kind of have that connection where he picks on me and I pick on him. That's all just kind of part of it. It is what it is. So yeah, we figured out long ago we're close enough we can pull that off and still keep keep good rapport. And if we ever step on the line, we always address that. So, but that said, yeah,
Two wrestling peas in a pod.
yeah. Well, I do love wrestling. I grew up watching it as a kid, so yeah, that we had that in common as well.
Always good wrestling memories for you. This is an incredible transition. Again, I have to pat myself on the back, but I imagine you and Dan were wrestling with the fact that, what if nobody shows up to this thing?
Well, yeah, exactly. I love that. That was beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. These are all scripted. I think back to the Field of Dreams game. If you build it, they will come. But that's not necessarily true in the event space. Same thing for any podcaster who's about to launch a podcast. Everybody wonders, like, oh man, what do I do if nobody listens to this thing? So what were your main tactics that actually worked as far as making sure that people actually come to podcast movement in the first place?
Max, I will say, and I think Dan has said the same thing in interviews. We were just so blinded by our own zeal for doing something, like taking action, that the common sense was just thrown out the window. So, like, common sense would have said, okay, you've never done this before. You guys really aren't that influential, and you don't have an email list, and you don't have all the things that people would say you need to have a successful crowdfunding campaign to launch an idea. And we just ignored all of that. We're like, forget all that, let's just do it. So if we had known now what it would take and the various challenges we were going to run into, I have to think we might have second guessed ourselves and maybe not have even done podcast movement, because yeah, maybe it was delusions of grandeur. I don't know. Right. But we were just like, hey, let's go for it. So we launched a crowdfunding campaign. We asked people if they'd support it. And when I say people, I'm talking about, we did not have like influence in podcasting at all. We didn't have big email lists. We just had friends that were podcasters, people we interviewed on our shows. So we went to people and we have mutual friends, Max, that I can throw out names and some of these people and we went to a couple of those folks and said, hey, will you support this? Will you share this? Will you speak at this? And a number of them said yes. And that was like, okay, great. If we got these folks, we can build off that. So we launched a campaign with, several names that what we thought were names. It was all primarily like business podcasters at the time, because that's really all we knew.
No, who? I mean, nobody likes those business podcasters anyway.
Well, I mean, whether they do or not, at the time, that was who we connected with. That's who we knew. So these are the people that we went and asked for help, and a lot of them were gracious. Some weren't, which is another podcast. I can tell those stories some other time. But we've got plenty of run-ins with people that we that preach helping and preach serving and hooking others up, and then, man, when it's their turn to give back, they don't do it. But anyway, we won't get into that. But there was a number of people that were gracious and did support it, and then we did the campaign, and in the first day we had enough. We had met the minimum goal, and then at the end of the 30-day period, we had 3 times the number of the minimum goal. So that was the validation to do the event. So then it was, okay, how do we actually logistically pull this off and execute it? And so we had the crowdfunding campaign in February, and the first event was in August of that year. And we did it in Dallas. The reason we picked Dallas is because Dallas, the year before, it had an event called, I think it was called Pod Camp. And so there had been a Pod Camp event in Dallas, like in the last year. So we knew, okay, there's enough people interested in podcasting that in Dallas that they came to this pod camp. So if they come to this pod camp, they'd probably come to podcast movement. So that's why we decided Dallas. Plus we're like, it's central, people could fly in pretty easily. Most cities have a one-way flight to Dallas, and direct flight or whatever. So that's why we picked it. And yeah, we were hoping, hey, what if we could, let's dream big. What if we could get 200 people? And that first year was 600 people max, which is, my goodness. Yeah. Like that was way beyond our comprehension. And so we did the first event and took copious notes and learned a lot of what worked and what didn't work. And then there was no rest for the weary. It was already, okay, we're committing to a venue for the next year, and then following what we needed to do to start preparing for the next year's event. So it was as soon as we finished this one thing, it was almost like no time to even celebrate it. It was immediately, okay, let's start prepping for the next one. It took a full year literally to do that. So we were just so blinded by we're going to take action and we're going to do this, that we didn't even really process the crazy amount of work and the hours and the commitment that it was requiring to take on something so crazy and audacious. But I'm glad that we were that foolish, I guess, because you have to be a little bit crazy.
I'm loving the different words that come out to describe how you were every time.
Yeah, you have to be a little bit crazy to do something audacious, because common sense is, well, if you don't have this experience and you don't have this email list and you don't have these connections, then you probably shouldn't do it. And that's not necessarily bad advice. So I'm glad we didn't follow that, but I can tell you that because we didn't follow that, there was a lot of learning and a lot of banging our heads against the wall. And there's a lot of heartache and a lot of, oh my gosh, just stressful times, and testing of relationships and marriage. And my wife was like, made jokes to me about, podcasting is your mistress. And, oh, that's not the joke you want to hear from your wife. I was like, oh goodness.
Oh my God. My fiance probably is saying the same thing about me in podcasting as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and we love it and we get it, but not everyone who's in it as intimately as you and I are, Max, they may not understand or appreciate that, especially if it's not producing a certain type of result financially and at the time, I can promise you, we were not making any money. We were lucky to break even. And there was a couple of events where we didn't even break even. We actually lost money. So, that was a very challenging season. But the good news is we licked our wounds when we made mistakes. We had meetings, and we just determined what went wrong. How do we fix it? And I can't take full credit for that, because I'm more of an emotional guy, Max, and like, Dan is so, like, that's one of my favorite things about Dan Franks. He is so level-headed, and he's
unless he's in the wrestling ring.
Even in the wrestling ring, like, if you go find some of his old matches, like, he was
oh my God. Hold on, you've already shouted out Google, now you're shouting out YouTube as well.
Yeah, if he hadn't gotten hurt, I think he maybe he had a legit shot. I'm glad he got hurt, because that, now we're business partners. But
yeah, you should check out the tumblers on his wrestling background as well.
I will. I'm going to. It's a shame that I haven't done that already. But that said, he is so, like, things just bounce right off him, like, and that's not me. Like, somebody messes with me, I'm like, hey man, listen here, like, I got that. I used to be in the Navy, and in the Navy, you learn you stand up for yourself, and you don't take crap from people. And, like, I'm more of a, okay, let's get uncomfortable, let's talk this out,
Yeah. Listen to me, brother.
Yeah. Exactly. Hulk Hogan type of promo. Where Dan is very level-headed, and he's like, okay, let's back away, let's back up, let's not take this personally, let's figure out what we need to do next time. And because he's like that, and he's had that clear mind, man, he's talked me off the bridge many times, and so I'd like to think there's a good balance there with Dan and I, where I compliment him in some other areas. But I got to say, that is a massive strength on Dan's side, is he just is able to just not let things bother him. And I have not been that way. Things will bother me, but they will not bother him. And when on the random occasion I do see something that bothers him, I'm always like shocked. Like, I'll tell my wife Rachel, I'll be like, Dan got mad today. She's like, Dan? I'm like, I know. It's like, can you believe it? It's like, he never gets mad. She's like, what made him mad? And I'll tell her, she'll be like, that made him mad. I'm like, yeah. I was like, I wouldn't have guessed.
You
So,
two certainly work well with each other, but to your point, I think it does take a little bit of crazy or foolishness or whatever you want to call it to do something really big and do something really special. And you see it time and time again with so many business owners or people that have just created something that really has become a sensation. You can't let yourself worry too much about stuff not working, or like, obviously you have to be realistic on certain things, but as far as your passion and energy for it, you have to be over the moon excited about it and kind of open to the fact of, who cares? If this doesn't work out, let's just do it, make it happen, and who knows? And so it's really inspiring hearing your side of that as well as Dan's side. With Podcast Movement, you've been able to grow it and make it bigger. And now, I was not there in person the first few years, but I know you've made it much bigger and better, and the community has grown so much. Just for an example, like your Facebook page, I think is over 65,000 people. You got Podcast Movement University now. I mean, there's thousands of people that come to your conferences. What are the main ways that you think you've been able to make this thing bigger and better?
Making community the priority, I think, is the biggest answer to that, which I'm sure we'll touch on here in a bit. But aside from that, high quality is just a central focus. That, and again, I have to credit the team and credit Dan, because it can be so tempting when you don't have a lot of resources to say, okay, well, let's maybe cut corners here. Let's maybe not worry about this. And there's sometimes when that's completely reasonable. But for us, we wanted to create an environment that was as high quality as we could. So we didn't skip on certain things. Like we skipped paying ourselves for multiple years, Max. When there was surplus, we put it right back into the business, and that served us well. Although that was a difficult decision, we were in it for the long haul. And I remember my wife was like, "Why aren't you getting paid for all this work?" And it's like, well, we make money. It's just we invest the money back into the business. We don't pay ourselves yet, because if you're really going to build something that's long term and has this massive impact, we believe that's what you got to do. And so that was a wise decision, because then all of a sudden we had, the ability to spend money on things and have a little bit nicer venue. Just make those kinds of decisions, because we had a little bit of a budget to work with. And so we got a reputation early on as, hey, this isn't just a good event with good people. This is actually a high quality event. Like the resort is nice, the venue's nice, the experience overall is good. It's not a cheaply pieced together thing. And so we got that reputation really quick, and that attracted bigger sponsors, that attracted bigger names, that attracted the NPRs, that attracted the Apple, the bigger players. We didn't have relationships with them initially, but we started to develop those. And as we developed those, and they actually gave us a chance and came and checked out the event, they realized, okay, there is something to this. We want to be involved. I mean, just little wins, like, the first event was mostly business podcasters, and a lot of the attendees were mostly male, white business podcasters. And so, yeah, and then and we love that demographic, but we also are like, hey, podcasting has more than that. There's a lot of circles. How do we connect with these other circles? So then there was an intentional effort to say, okay, how do we connect with comedians? How do we connect with people in education? How do we connect with, just people that are doing different types of podcasts, not just business? How do we connect with the sports people? How do we connect, and so we started thinking through that, like, okay, how do we get to know these folks? How do we make an environment where the different circles of podcasts can learn from each other? Because the business podcaster can teach someone to the comedian, and the comedian can teach something to the business podcaster, where, both shows can get better by learning from what's working for one person and applying it, or creating your own, version of that.
By the way, I think that's some of my favorite magic of Podcast Movement, because I know, and I've been in Orlando, I've been in Nashville. I know when I'm going to Podcast Movement that there's certain sessions that, like, I'm definitely going to, and I'm excited about. Like, for me now, being in the podcast production space, like stuff on that side is super helpful, as well as things that can help you in terms of improving quality, growing your audience. But one of the most pure, fun, and enjoyable, but also insightful areas is to go to those different sessions that are different. Like if you have a speaker who has a podcast in like the horror space, or like in the drinking space, or like, sports space, like those different ranges like that, I think that's where some of the most creative insights come from. So that kind of mix of all those different things is really one of the things that makes podcast movement so special in my mind.
Well, and that didn't exist even at New Media Expo. That did not exist prior to podcast movement. Is these circles were not overlapping, to our knowledge, anywhere. And we looked far and wide to try to find it, and we couldn't find it. So we really believed, okay, this is the opportunity. The opportunity is not just putting together a podcast conference. The opportunity is bringing podcasters from a lot of different circles, a lot of different niches and categories together so that they can learn from each other. That became more of a focus. And when that became more of a focus, that's when more people started to get involved. More people started to give us a chance. So then you kind of mix that with the decision to try to be as high quality as possible. And there was just a number of things that worked, that were good decisions, even though they were tough decisions at the time. And that put us in a position, to get some speakers that we probably had no business getting. But we would have, Sarah Koenig from Serial come and keynote at our event. We would have Mark Maron come and keynote. We'd have Kevin Smith, who made Clerks, come and speak. Yeah. We'd have these people start to give us a chance and show up and come to these events. And Aisha Tyler, who she used to be on the I think the Talk, and she's done a lot of stuff, a lot of acting and great podcasts. We just had all these people that were like all of a sudden willing to, show up and come and try it out and check into it. Gimlet was a big deal a few years back. They still are, but they were a bigger deal back then. And they started getting involved, and Wondery and Stitcher and all these other people that, that names that podcasters might recognize, those folks started coming to the event, and they started, sending their staff to the event. And so now it wasn't just the independent, person recording in their closet. It was, okay, these are some of the big players. Like, these are guys that are taking this serious, and they do this for a business. And one year we got an award from Dropbox. Dropbox was our main sponsor for one of our events. It was the one in Chicago. And the reason we got that award, or that sponsorship, was because we had agreed early on, after year one, that we wanted to try to have a diverse speaker lineup. So we were actually recognized as a new up and coming event that has a diverse speaker lineup. And for that, we were rewarded with this, sponsorship money from Dropbox. And we were like, wow, this is an awesome validation, like we're making progress here. So yeah, just a lot of, there's so many little stories, Max, that I couldn't begin to tell in this podcast. We're just little wins just popping up left and right. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, there's, kind of excited before, but now it's like, okay, no, this is real. This is really happening. And then you see, the ultimate form of flattery is when people imitate you. So you see all these other podcast events popping up.
Yeah. Did you see Modcast Poofment?
No, I haven't, but yeah, if that's real, it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, you see all these other podcasting conferences popping up, and these are all people that have attended our events. They're like, oh, they can do it, we're gonna go do it. And they've gone and created their own thing, and it may or may not be as successful, but regardless, that's kind of the ultimate form of flattery is you see, okay, here's people that have been podcast movement community members and supporters, and now they're going and starting basically what we're doing. They're competitors, so to speak. But for the most part, podcasters don't really look at it that way. I think a lot of podcasters are pretty synergistic and collaborative in spirit, and until they have a reason not to be. And yeah, to your point, just I think a little bit of craziness, a lot of resilience. So, learning what didn't work, and then, figuring out how to fix it, and getting feedback from people. Like, how was the event? What was things that you thought might be better next time? Just listening to that and applying it to the next year, and then the next year. And then eventually you kind of have a nice little formula that overall is reasonable, and you just keep tweaking, every year. And we've followed that principle from day one, and it's served us well. I wouldn't pretend that we've still got all the answers. We don't, but whatever things that we've been weak in, we've found people who are really strong at, and we've got them now as contractors or staff even. And so we've got people on our team now that help us do the things that we were weak in the beginning, and they help us, and we, so it is a village, so to speak. It takes the village. It's not just two people trying to, throw this event. It's a lot of people that are involved, and it's because we learned over a couple of events, like, okay, we have to have somebody do this, we have to have somebody do this part, we have to have somebody do this, who's going to be good at that, who can handle that. And we were able to find those people and then get them on board. And now that's a huge reason why it has become sustainable and become a legit business, and something that's growing, and something that's, branched off, just not even just from events, but become a media company overall. And we do newsletters. We have a professional services piece of our business. We have other things that we do. And a lot of that is, because of just slowly figuring out, okay, how to get better, how to get people on board that know how to do the things that we need done, that are not our strengths. So, because I can promise you, if it had just been Dan and Jared just trying to put on a show, like, I don't know that would have resonated long term. Yeah. And it also speaks to the overall goodness of the podcast community. It's a very good community. So
exactly right. And now that you are certainly established, and I would even venture and say you've gotten this thing off the ground by now.
I hope so. Yeah.
When you look back on like this entire journey so far, what element of it warms your heart the most?
There's a variety of aspects of that. So I've had conversations with people that are real intense, where people have said, hey, this community is one of the reasons why I'm come out of serious depression. So just stories that are not even about fame or money, or, just life. I've had really sincere talks with folks who are just were struggling, and maybe not even sure if they wanted to keep going. And then the community aspect of podcast movement played a big role in them being able to kind of work through that and come out of that. And that's just like, wow, this is life-giving. This is, it's more than just, a business. It's more than just a, fun time to get together with friends or meet new people. It's something that actually, can help someone, the relationships that we've made, the friend, not just relationship, but friends, like true friends, that have, some have led to business. Some have just been just good people that, man, I had a weird day. I need to call up my buddy. I've got a buddy I met at podcast movement, so I call him up, and we chat for 30 minutes or an hour or whatever. Those things are wonderful. And it's wonderful too, I think, to be in a position from a business side, where I had never made enough money to be in a position to tell my wife, hey, you don't have to work anymore. And, my wife and I always both worked. And, to finally, we got to a point financially where I was like, hey, if you don't want to work, you don't have to. And then when the pandemic hit, we were able to make a decision. Hey, let's just go off one income for a while. And we were able to do that. And that to me was a wonderful thing. Like that was an eye opener to my wife, to my family, where they were saying, oh, okay, there's, there's something to this. It's not just a fun thing that Jared is, just doing to do. Like there's actual, business, legit business aspect to this.
Right. It's not just Jared's mistress.
Exactly. I mean, and yeah, of course that's a joke, but I mean, there was a long time where it felt like that, and it appeared that way. But those are moments that I'm real proud of. I'm proud of being able to talk to people that are new and hear their stories and hear what they're wanting to work on. I'm like, hey, you should also meet Max, or you should also meet this person, because
you probably shouldn't meet Max. That would be
yeah, if you
know what you're signing up for.
If you want to be harassed and have good segues, meet Max. But no, but I love being able to do that. I love to meet someone, and they're in LA and they're trying to do this thing. And I'm like, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so. They're also in LA. They've had some progress in this area. And then they become friends, and that becomes like a source of encouragement and inspiration for them. So there are so many stories of things like that where just connections, it's just like, now you're just saying, hey, do you know Tom? Go meet Tom, or go meet Stacy, or whatever. I absolutely love podcast movement. If this job, for whatever reason, was no longer my job, man, it'd be really hard to find something to do that would compete with it, because I just love it so much. Like, it's become something that is a blast. Like, I look forward to work every day. I enjoy what I do. I enjoy interacting with new members. I enjoy. One of my favorite stories from a podcast movement was a lady who does a bird watching podcast, and she's pretty well respected in that world. She was at an event, and I asked her, I was like, hey, what was one of the sessions that you thought was really helpful? And I just assumed she'd mention one of the keynotes or one of the obvious ones, but she was like, oh no, that's the wrestlers. It all goes back to wrestling, Max. She's like, the guys, yeah, the guys that did the wrestling session, talking about how they do engaging with their audience and how they monetize their shows. And they had so many unique ideas that I've never heard anywhere else. And I can apply this to what I do. And I was like, yes, exactly. This is why we do this. What other conference, what other place is there where the bird watcher and the wrestler connect? That just doesn't usually happen. So but those are the types of situations that happen, is relationships, friendships, connections, ideas. And so usually a typical person that attends a podcast movement conference will come away, they'll be encouraged, they'll be motivated, they'll be excited. They're like, hey, I met some really interesting people, I have some new ideas, I have some things I want to try, I have some encouragement to put myself out there. All of those things usually happen for most attendees when they come back.
It's incredibly special what you and team have created. I really appreciate everything you do, and it's clear that your passion comes out, but also more than anything, the power of connection that's possible within this podcasting community to your examples is off the charts. I mean, never seen anything like it. And I can second that, and I'll third that and fourth that and fifth that as well. But if you have any sort of exposure to podcast moment, you do come away encouraged, motivated, and excited. I think that's kind of a great way to classify it. It's a fantastic reboot for your podcast and kind of your podcasting aspirations. So how'd you like to show up to the next podcast movement with a spectacular, fantastic podcast? It doesn't need to be called that, but how'd you like to feel that way? If you would like a podcast for your business or your brand, but you haven't quite gotten over the hump yet, I can help you out. Shoot me an email at max@maxpodcasting.com. I will take a lot of that behind-the-scenes work off your plate so you can focus on truly the fun parts of podcasting that you truly, truly enjoy. I will take those off your plate and together deliver that high-quality podcast that you truly deserve, your brand, your business truly deserves, and that quality is a reflection back on your brand and reputation. So it's important. It's important. Email me at max@maxpodcasting.com. We will get you squeaky, clean, shiny, fantastically spectacular in terms of your podcast so you can show it off at the next podcast movement. Now, to probably the most musically sound Wild Business shout out of the week in podcast history. So let's get to a fan favorite segment called the Wild Business shout out of the week.
The Wild Business shout out of the week.
You should do a banjo just for this one. Just humor me.
Wild Banjo shout out of the week.
This is BYOB, Bring Your Own Banjo podcast. But Wild Business shout of the week is where we talk about a creative marketing approach campaign, something that caught our attention and really just broke through the clutter. You've already kind of alluded to we'll just call it your love for Dan and your kind of endless praise and support for Dan as well as the rest of the PM team. And there's something about Dan's approach and the team's approach of really kind of taking yourself out of the spotlight that I think has also been a huge contributing factor to the magic of podcast movement. You mind taking us through kind of what I call the Houdini effect?
Yes, I do, and I want I hope that the listeners appreciate this, and then the intent here is not to brag on ourselves, but I do want to brag on Dan. I do want to brag on the team for a strategy that most people might think is contrarian or counterintuitive, but it has been very effective for us, and that is this mindset that we established from the very beginning. Through Dan's leadership and through the team overall, just accepted this mindset of, hey, to create true community, what we feel is the best approach is to not make podcast movement about ourselves. And what we mean by that is not put our faces on the marketing, not get up on the stage and keynote ourselves to boost our own brand or boost our own ego or whatever. We've been to plenty of conferences where we've seen other people do that, and more power to them. But we believed that, hey, if we want people to trust us, we want people to really believe, hey, podcast movement is a legit community, then probably the best way to do that is to not ever make it about ourselves, but to make it about the community. Let the community be the heroes. Let the community get on stage. Give them the opportunities. Don't hog them for ourselves, so to speak. And so we've adapted that early on. I sensed that was the right thing, and that was an idea that Dan suggested, and I just sensed that yes, he's right. This is not what people might teach in a personal branding class or a online marketing class, but this made sense for us, and we've applied this. And over the years, what we've seen, Max, is people will say, hey, this event is successful, who's behind this? And they ask that question, and that's an interesting question, because then they start to say, well, this couldn't have just come up from nothing. Like, how did this come to be? And they start to ask, well, who's behind it? Who's doing this? And they learn about the people and the team. And so the result is the same, if not more effective, than if the team or if Dan or myself were putting our faces on the marquee banners, or if we were taking the extra keynote session or whatever to be on stage and be visible. By choosing not to do these things, it's actually created that interest as the event grows, and as the influence of the event expands. More people are saying, well, I see a lot of other events that have this center keynote person, or this central person, but this event doesn't do that. And so it's become, well, why don't they do that? I think the best answer to that is, we've realized that we can really foster community, and that community will say, hey, I have a sense of trust with these people, because I don't feel like they're trying to pull one over on me. I don't feel like they're just making it about themselves. Because when somebody's just making it about themselves, you can sense that. And hey, this person might be helping me a little bit, but really they're helping themselves. And by pulling ourselves out of the equation, I think that has really helped us more than anything else that we've done. But we've done a lot of things, and we've learned a lot of lessons, and there's been a lot of things that have helped podcast movement grow. But I think one of the biggest is by delayed gratification, so to speak. Just not saying, okay, this needs to be about ourselves. Let's make it about the community. And if we truly make it about the community, that will speak for itself. In your own brand, in your own ways, how can you put the spotlight on your community? How can you put your spotlight on your people? Because that's what makes them appreciate you. That's what makes them want to come back. That's what makes them want to be involved, is when they realize, hey, this isn't just about this person. This is really about, something that's helpful, and something that I can, use or apply to continue to reach the goals that I have. And when you can do that, I think that's when you can create a community. And when you create a community, that's a powerful thing. I shared this in a book that I wrote a few years back, but when you're standing by yourself, Max, and you're waving this flag, look at me, most people will never, they might look at you for a second, but they'll ignore you.
They'll be like, who's that with the weird voice that's just standing there?
Because everybody online wants to get noticed, right? You're trying to create a YouTube channel or a podcast or whatever. Everybody's like, but please listen to me. And if they don't know who you are, they probably won't. But what they do listen to is an army. When an army comes through and everybody's saying, we love Max, everybody's like, who's Max? I need to check out what Max, what is Max up to? And how do you do that? Well, the only way to do that is you just start to notice people. And as you notice people, it creates this rapport over time, as you're generous and You're not self-serving when you this rapport will yield reciprocity. And reciprocity is like, I really like Max, and because Max has been so good to me, I want to tell people about Max. Max has this book coming out, or Max has this service. I want to tell people about that because Max is a generous guy and he's been good to me, and I like Max. So when you got a lot of people starting to say I like Max, that's the army. You build the army, and when the army's saying we love Max, people will see that, they'll hear that, and they'll say, well, who is Max? What's Max doing? I need to check out what Max is up to. And so all of a sudden, that is how you get noticed. It's so counterintuitive, but getting noticed is actually really starts by you noticing other people. And by genuinely doing that, you will create a rapport that yields reciprocity, where you actually get noticed in return, but you're not ever purposely trying for that.
By the way, an army of Max would be the corniest, cheesiest army ever. Probably wouldn't do any good as
an army of
but...
you. It's an army of people that have shirts that say this pivotal moment where I found Max, whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the baseball script font. But your message is spot on though. And I think it's really genuine. It's really transparent. And any sort of communication you see from Podcast Movement it's all about community. And that's something that when you take yourself out of it, when you pull a Houdini, when you take yourself out of it, you create that community. You just give back everything you said with rapport and reciprocity, which, shout out alliteration, always a big fan. Creating that community and taking yourself out of it, that's something that you can apply as a podcaster, you can apply as a business owner. You do it long enough, and certainly good things are bound to happen.
Well said.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just restating what you said, so thank you. Right back at you.
We like to keep it humble here. Yeah. Wild and humble. Yeah.
Exactly. The wild, humble soliloquy with friends. Let's Houdini out of this thing. Let's wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
Sure. Whether I am or not, let's go.
All right. Let's get wild. What would be your ring name if you were a professional wrestler?
Oh, man. Okay, so as a fifth grade, this if I was in fifth grade right now, I was answering this question, I'd be Rock and Roll RPM Matt Corey. That was my wrestling name in fifth grade. So I'm gonna stick with that. Yeah, and I don't have any reason for where I came up with that name. That was just the name that I loved in fifth grade.
I like it. It's energy. I'm already seeing a whole line of action figures.
Yeah, and this is the only podcast where you'll ever hear that. Yeah, no one has ever heard that before.
All right, I think we're good.
My mom doesn't even know that one. Yeah. How
about quirks? In addition to being a fifth grader, naming wrestling, fictional or real wrestling figures, what is a quirk? Something about your personality that your wife or family, somebody calls you out for, that's just a little quirky about who you are, but it's who you are. No reason to change it.
Oh, we've already discussed it. It's dad jokes. I'm a dad joke guy. So I post dad jokes on social media. People roll their eyes. I've had people just say, why do you do this? This is, you're causing me pain. And then there's other people be like, man, that was a laugh. That was, I actually needed a laugh today. And that's what I think is the intent behind that is, yeah, they're bad jokes and they're supposed to be bad. And I had a guest one time, John Kinney, he told me, tell bad jokes. I asked him, I was like, what's your final thought in the interview? And he's like, tell bad jokes. And I'm like, why would you say that? It's like, everybody likes bad jokes. They say they don't, but they really do. And it's like, and it breaks up the monotony. There's all this chaos and craziness in the world, all this crazy stuff. Like, just tell a bad joke. Right. and for whatever reason, I was just like, yeah, that speaks to me. I get that. So no, I tell a lot of weird bad jokes, and they're clean. They're not anything terrible. They're just funky. And some people don't care for them, and some people do. And they're all stolen. I don't make them. Occasionally, I make them up, but mostly I, borrow like the next person. So
whether it's stolen or borrowed or regifted, however you want to do it, is there a quick dad joke that's top of mind that you want to share?
Well, and again, these aren't very good, so just know that going in.
That goes without saying with dad jokes.
So what do you call a pop singer's friends?
Oh, I'm not even going to try. Go for it.
Britney's peers.
Oh, man. Wow.
Yeah.
Bravo.
I told you it's not good, but yeah. And you can edit that out. I know that was horrible. Yeah.
No, I might edit out the rest of what you said, but I'll keep that part in. All right. What is a weird talent that you have, something that you're really good at that many people would be surprised to know. Something that has nothing to do with podcast movement.
I'm a reasonable beatboxer.
Oh, nice. Is
Yes.
there like a 4-second beatbox you can do for us here?
There you go. Now, you know what was funny about that is one time we were trying to get people's attention. We were doing a live podcast at FinCon, and we couldn't get anybody's attention because there was loudspeakers, but we were doing a podcast episode, and we wanted people to actually listen to the podcast, and everybody's just kind of talking. And so I just got on the mic and started beatboxing, and the other guy started like rapping, like freestyle rapping, and we had the whole room like checking us out. And then we did the interview, and I think they watched this until they realized, oh, it's just a podcast, and they moved on. But yeah, it was effective for a moment.
No, that's incredible. That always comes in handy.
Yeah, it hasn't, but
MacGruber over there. What is a lesson that you still take with you to this day from being in the Navy?
The Navy stands for never again volunteer yourself.
Oh
So
God.
I think there's some wisdom in that. I do appreciate all our servicemen and women and their sacrifice, and I've made a lot of really awesome connections, people I still laugh with and love to this day from my time in the military. And I got to live in Hawaii. Hawaii was fantastic, and I mean, I'm just so grateful for those memories. But then there was a lot of challenging and even dark and depressing times that were a part of that story too. And you take the good and you take the bad, you put them together, and then you have the facts of life. So yeah, that's my Navy story. But no, I do appreciate our men and women in service and first responders. All those folks really do have an appreciation for them, and it's not easy to do that work.
Appreciate. Yeah. Right back with you. There's talk about a line of work that has so much meaning, like literally saving life. Like there's unbelievable. And then last thing, if you could host podcast movement anywhere in the universe, I'm not even going to limit you to this world, anywhere in the entire universe, where would be a really cool place to do so?
In the military, I was in Hawaii, so I think it'd be amazing to just get all these people to just come over to Hawaii for a week and not just enjoy a podcast conference, but enjoy a beautiful exotic location. So I would say Hawaii. I mean, there's tons of places you could have podcast movement, but I think Hawaii would be a neat one. I'm very confident we'll never have it in Hawaii, but that would.
I was just about to commit verbally to appearing in person in Hawaii, but I guess we'll have to save that for another lifetime.
I know the numbers would dip so hard it wouldn't even be worth it. But no, I always got a love for Hawaii, so yeah, I'd say Hawaii. That's my answer.
Definitely on my bucket list. Glad it's on the fictionally or not. Glad it's on the podcast movement bucket list as well.
They have a convention center in Hawaii, and I always think like, man, how do these companies make this work? Because this is just so far away for people to travel. I guess if you got companies that have the budget to send everybody to Hawaii,
right. It's probably only California and Asian
I would guess
companies. That's probably
maybe.
the only and Hawaiian companies, I guess, too.
But yeah, I mean that would be amazing to be able to do that. And for now, I think we're gonna keep the main podcast movement in North America, but there are opportunities to create and have other events in other places, and those are things that are on the horizon. I'm proud to say.
Very cool. Literally on the horizon. Nicely. Wow.
Yes.
There we go. So we start with segues, we segue with segues, and we'll end with segues as well. Jared, thank you so much for sharing your story, the podcast movement story, a lot of embarrassing banjo and wrestling stories, everything in between. Really, really appreciate all you do and the amazing things from podcast movement and just the best community out there. Where is the best place for people to connect with you, learn more about you personally, as well as get involved with the podcast movement?
The first place, most importantly, is your podcast, Max. They need to be checking this out every episode.
Oh,
and,
thank
so they
you
should
so
be
much.
coming here. Let's make sure they do that first. And then after that, if they want to continue down this rabbit hole, they can email me, Jared, Jared. It's not Gerald, it's not J-Rod, Jared at podcastmovement.com. But yeah, we encourage you, come over to podcastmovement.com to see what's going on. There's lots of cool newsletters. There's lots of cool articles. We have a university that's free to join. with lots of great resources. And then, of course, we have events every so often that are as epic as we can make them, and people that come have a good time. So
perfect. Thank you so much. And last thing here, final thoughts. The stage is yours. It could be a quote, a line, a beatbox solo, whatever you want. Send us home. Send us home here.
I'll send you home with a poem. No, can I do like an interpretive dance?
I was thinking epic poem, like at least 12 stanzas.
No, I want to reiterate what we said earlier. I think when you're wanting to get attention, the temptation's just, to look at me, but that typically doesn't work. So start by noticing others, and then that, as you notice people genuinely, and you do that with no contrived mindset, you're just giving, that will create that rapport that over time yields reciprocity. And when you have a lot of people saying, hey, we love Max, that's when folks will say, let me check out what Max is up to. It doesn't happen overnight, which is why a lot of people may not prefer that method, but that's a good way to get noticed. You want to get noticed, you start by noticing.
And I happen to notice that Jared is just an all-around awesome dude, amazing podcaster, entrepreneur, pivotable. Jared, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, sharing your tips, the podcast movement story, all you do, even with your Houdini effect. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to follow the Wild Business Growth Podcast on your favorite podcast app, and tell a friend about the podcast. Yeah, listen to Jared. Make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast. I just said that. You can also find us on Good Pods with a bunch of other fascinating podcasts and podcasters. And if you want to learn more about podcast production, you can do so at MaxPodcasting.com. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!